Alright, so now that we have the UVs completed, let's move into the actual gathering of texture reference. This is a very important part in my process. I'll spend a little bit extra time gathering the proper reference, and that'll save me a lot of time in the end. So here are a couple images I found online that kind of showcase female skin, young female skin. And I chose a female character because it's one of the most difficult types of skin to paint, is young and female, because there's a lot less variation, a lot less roughness going on in terms of pore size and variation in color. So it makes it a challenge to make it look real, but also making it look young and youthful and vibrant. And as you can see, all three of these images have been photoshopped in some way or another. The middle one less so, but definitely the left and the right. And telltale signs are just the fact that everything is pretty perfect looking, especially in the sclera, where they paint out all the veins and all the redness and any kind of extra bags under the eyes and anything that's catching kind of shadows that are not aesthetically pleasing, they paint out. There's a little bit more shininess on her face. This seems a bit more of a raw image. However, the eyes are a telltale sign that there was some Photoshop, if not a lot of Photoshop, going on in the face. So recognizing these things when you're gathering your reference is vital in terms of deciphering the type of details that you want to put in and the type of details you want to leave out. And typically for me, I gather two types of reference. I'll gather reference that's strictly for referring to, reference like this, referring to with regards to what I should be doing and what I shouldn't be doing. And then I'll also gather reference that I'll actually use in painting. And so these are kind of examples of things that I kind of want to stay away from. There's some really nice things going on in here, but typically I want to stay away from pure whites in the eyes. They brighten up the scleras in her face. So if we were to try to translate that perfectly onto a CG character, it'll start going into the Pixar realm and less photoreal. So we want to keep an eye out for that. No pun intended. And then I'll gather reference such as this and this, there's some very interesting things going on in these faces. For example, she does have makeup on, and that's another thing I wanted to stress, is that all three of these women are wearing some kind of makeup, so it's going to hide a lot of the variation and discrepancies that you do get in skin because of all the makeup. However, for instance, for here, this is an interesting example because she does have makeup on, but it's not been photoshopped. You can see the veins in her eyes. You can see the variation even in the whites of her eyes. You can see all the blemishes, the shininess of her face, a lot of peach fuzz on her face, the wrinkles. She's a bit older than what we're painting. However, this is a good example of, a realistic portrayal of skin with makeup on. And on the flip side, we'll get an image something like this, where this is a pretty raw image, and she's very oily, almost to the point of looking wet. Tons of variation in her skin. We probably don't want to go this far because she's looking a little sickly, but there's a lot of cool stuff going on in here, and recognizing these things and adding in things that we think will be a nice variation to the model will only help. So these are reference images that I gather for reference only, and then there are images that I gather for actual painting. And here's an example of one of them. And this image, as most of you may know, comes from 3DSK. It's a wonderful site for getting good high-res skin images. And these are the images that I will be using to grade, color correct, even out, and paint with. So let's go through the process of my process of actually grading this image. Because as you can see, there's a lot of specular highlights, a lot of variation based off of Fresnel on our skin, things that we want to kind of take out so we're not fighting later on when we're painting. So these 3DSK images are fairly old. There's a lot of cool new photography techniques coming out on the market and into the industry with the use of CPL filters, cross-polarized lens filters, that eliminate virtually all of the reflection in the skin, which is a huge time saver. Not just because we don't have to paint it out, but also because it also takes out the reflection and shows a much better representation of what the color looks like of your skin. And I have an example right here, courtesy of Paul Callender over at surfacemimic.com. So here's an example of a photograph that he's taken without a CPL filter on the right and with. And as you can see, there is a stark difference. So over here you can see all of the oiliness on her skin, the highlights of the reflection of her skin. It kind of washes out the skin tones. As opposed to here, you get a true, accurate representation of what the skin pigment is doing. And there is a load of variation. Obviously we get some shadowing that we have to paint out, but that's minor in comparison to what we would have had to paint out here. So ideally, if you can get photographs like these, it's kind of the best of the best. It's going to save a lot of time in your work, and it's going to make your work look that much better. And then you'll use these as reference in terms of what kind of pores to lay down and what kind of spec maps to paint. Unfortunately, we don't have an array of images like these, so we're going to have to make do with what we got. So when I grade images, it's kind of an exploration as well, just like UVing. I kind of just test things out and really find my way organically. There's a couple methodical things I do when I grade images, but for the most part it's just trial and error. So the first thing I want to do is I want to change the skin tone. I like the skin tone on her, but it doesn't quite fit with what the image I had in my head for the model that Stephen Lord provided. This girl has a lot more olive tone skin, more of a Mediterranean feel, and I wanted to go more of a white Caucasian kind of European feel. So the first thing I did was I just did a simple color correct with a hue saturation filter, like so. And it's just taking some of that yellow olive out and introducing more of those pinks and the blues and the reds, which I like a lot better. So that's going to be the base grade. And I'm doing this all on separate layers so I can transfer all this work to other images from this batch. So the next thing I like to do, and I always try this first because it saves me a lot of time if it does work, is test the shadows and highlights. And this allows me to mess with some of these settings and really kind of figure out ways of getting skin tone more even. And when you get something you like, you can actually go and save the script, which is actually what I've done here. And as you can see, I go from that to that in a single click of a button. And it's super powerful. Skin tone is going back towards that orange, but that's okay. The main focus is just getting that evenness on the skin. I'm really happy with that. So before I do that, actually, I'm going to duplicate that layer and apply it to the layer above. So I have an original for reference. Like so. Awesome. So I'm happy with that. It really takes all that tone, the variation from the shadows and the specularity out, which is awesome. There are areas here that I'm going to paint out later. But the next step I do is I focus on getting the highlights and the shadows out that I couldn't get out from the shadow and highlight script. And mainly it's under the eyes, kind of above the eyes, and the lips, so on and so forth. So what I like to do is I like to use a quick mask tool. And this is a really handy tool that I rely on heavily in Photoshop when I'm grading images. So I'm just going to take that down. And this is basically my process. I'm just going to go through here and systematically just layer and layer on adjustment layers that'll remove the shadows and highlights. Now it's a fine balance you want to be very careful with, because you have to really interpret this image. You have to understand that some of these variations aren't exactly shadows or highlights, but it's actually color variation. And this is where kind of the artistic side comes into play, and you got to really, run with it organically and not try to make it so incredibly flat, because when you do that, when you start painting their textures, you're going to lose a lot of that variation. It's going to start looking really flat in CG. So with these two, as you can see, I'm changing the tone so I can get a more even look, but I'm going to leave some of this in here because I like what's going on here. Some of it I may continue to take out, like this, maybe here. But some of it I'm going to purposely leave in because I know it's going to be serendipitous for me. When the time comes to start looking at variation. Like so. So this works really well for me. I'm getting all those tones out, and I'm changing the balance of the skin tone, and it's becoming more even. So when we pull back, we're getting more of an even tone on the skin, which is going to be really good when I project. And this is basically my process. So when I'm done, I'll get an image that looks something like this, where I've gone through and eliminated more of the highlights and the shadows, and even things out. And for the eyebrows, I tone those down too, because the shadows and highlight kind of wash those out. I want to get those back. And there you have it. So from here, I'm just going to grab all the other images in my library here and do the exact same grade to all of them, which is what I have here in this folder. Is I have a bunch of grades on the face, and then those will be the starting point for when I project my images in Mari. So this takes a little bit of time in the beginning, setting all this up, balancing all of this out, but it's going to pay dividends in the end when you're actually painting in Mari and everything's balanced evenly with really nice flat textures that you can really draw from and create some really cool texture work in the end. So from here, we're going to go into Mari, and I'm going to start showing you guys how to lay out the base color maps for the face.